Greetings, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to the first week when I'm coining Activate April. That's because I argue you'll be activating a new ego this week. This is different from the one you were born to. It's not based on survival. It's actually based on your thrival. From my smartphone to yours, keep streaming for your weekly Namaste Today. Welcome to Namaste Today, a spiritual way to start your day. I'm your host and spiritual life coach, Sensei Christopher Witecki. Welcome back, my friend. Namaste. We are now into the month of April. We're also into springtime. And Sensei says what's springing up this year is an entirely new ego. And you may wonder, well, how do I know that? Well, Uranus is about to end Aries. And if you don't know, Uranus entered Aries right in 2012 on the Mayan shift. So in my opinion, this new personality, this new ego, this new willpower that you're creating this week is your official response to the Mayan shift. So in this week's show, I'm going to talk about where the collective conscious is with all these changes and how we're all really one and together. And then later in our tea time, I'm going to specify 3 different areas of your consciousness that are changing at the same time. And I'll break that down for all 12 zodiac signs. But first, let's take a look at the week's moods and your zodiac weather. This zodiac weather is from Monday, April 2nd to Friday, April 6th, 2018. Looking at your 5-day moodcast. Looking at the week at a glance, it starts with a bang on Monday, and then you recover slowly through the week. Let's take a look. On Monday, it's sunny and shocking. Step 13 rules the day, promising surprises, and a moon in Scorpio may make you feel defensive. On Tuesday, it's cloudy and processing. Your mental state of awareness is what rules the day, and security is one of the things on your mind. Wednesday, it's sunny and peaceful. The sun finally comes out to play, and step 15 brings in harmony. On Thursday, it's sunny and clear. The moon in Sagittarius ties you to the story you were born to live, and step 16 ties you to your higher self. And then on Friday, it's sunny and super solid. You're ready to commit on a step 17 day, and a moon in Capricorn paves the way. Well, looking at the week coming ahead, there are a lot of changes to make this new ego. And I'm going to talk about what it means for you and the collective conscious. Taking a sneak peek at the upcoming week, this week the collective conscious is activating new behavior. Now, for those who are just tuning in, welcome to Namaste Today. In this segment, I want to talk about kind of the conscious shift that our collective consciousness is going to experience through this next week. And this is a new aspect I'm bringing to Namaste Today. It's always been clear to me, but I guess I haven't communicated it. You know, what we determine as astrologers and mystics is where the collective consciousness is. And we're very clear on where the collective consciousness is, and believe it or not, the collective conscious has a huge force on you. You know, like, we can't help but be surrounded by everything that's not us. And whatever this conscious field is collectively, it does inspire us all to sort of move or be pushed in certain synergies. It's kind of like weather. That's why I use weather as an example. Consciousness has its own weather patterns. And right now, the collective conscious weather pattern is birthing new motives. Now, new motives is based on really when Uranus went into Aries, which was in 2012. The Mayan shift, if you remember, it was on December 21st, 2012, or 20th, I'm not sure which one. But at that point, yes, the ceiling, so to speak, was raised. And that's what I understood it to be, that our potential for being in a higher frequency or our potential for peace went up. We had this ceiling raise of more conscious awareness open up. And what's happened this whole time is our ego has been growing and adapting to this raised ceiling of awareness, this awakeness, if you will. And in this adaptation, we've finally run to a point where we realize consciously that the ego that we started with in 2012 is not going to be appropriate whatsoever for where we are growing and going next. Now, on a more individual level, on a personal level, it basically means that the drives, the motives, the consciousness that has defined you and your character, which we call Aries or step 9, this consciousness really isn't appropriate either for where you want to go. And that's because we were all born into a big fight or flight sort of syndrome. I was born in the 70s, so I grew up, concerned about the Cold War and the earth ending. Never did my ego be shaped by everything is chill. Everything's going to be okay. My ego is always like crisis, crisis, crisis. And as you can tell, society, the collective consciousness, also does not quite know how to deal with the certain consciousness or the certain crises, right? Which you could say President Trump has brought, but I would say whether there was a Trump or not, I think the collective conscious was about to realize that, hey, violence isn't going to work anymore. Killing each other is not going to work. Pharmaceuticals choking us with poison isn't going to work. We're starting to realize that where the ego has been taking us for the last 30 to 40 years isn't going to work if we want to be happy and we want to be balanced and we want to enjoy this ride that we got on, the earth spinning around the sun, right? So this is the week, in my opinion, that we begin to birth a new ego. And if you're aware or not, the birth of an ego comes down to your behavior. Our ego is kind of our automated consciousness. It's the part of us that makes us move, basically. I know a lot of people associate it with having sex and the ego with violence and all these types of things. But all those things boil down to when you move. You know what I mean? Like move to kill somebody, move to have, make love to somebody. This is all movement, right? And it's also pushing energy too. So the part of us that pushes things to move forward, that's all ego-based consciousness. Now this ego consciousness, as I mentioned, was trained over your entire life. That's how you work an ego. You train it. Just like when we send someone goes into the military and they go into boot camp, they get their minds and egos retrained, or you could say washed, all right, into certain movements and certain thoughts. So we're at this point now where it's time to step away from the old ego, which I think is what last week was about. I think last week was day after day, this is the old me, this is the new me. This is the old me, this is the new me. Or for me, a lot of it was, when the new me starts, like I'm going to do this instead. So most of it was mistakes for me, which is fine. It's not even mistakes. It's the old ego. And this week, I think we actually start training our new little puppy inside of us, which is kind of how I look at the ego. It's like this little puppy. It's this part of us that goes and fetches and does different things. And what this comes down to this week is behavior. So when you put something into motion, as if you were dancing or learning a martial art or learning Tai Chi or any kind of cool motion kind of thing, you know that practice makes master. You practice, you continue to just glide and form. And this will be the same way that you birth a new ego this week. It comes down to your practice, all right? And shifting our priorities. One of the things when you have a fight or flight ego, the old ego, there's no time to practice. Anything bad could happen now. So everyone, there's no idea of perfection. It's all survival. If you made it to the finish line, if you made it through the marriage, if you made it, raising the kids, I made it. That was our ego's gratification. And I think part of what this new ego is, the ego gratification has to come from a new place. And this new place is perfecting the process, which is something I'm going to talk about this week with my Serious Joy subscribers. So this week we are activating our new behavior. And that means there'll be days where you're on the ball and there's days where you're not on the ball. I've taken yoga and dance classes and stuff myself. There's days when I was grooving and there were days when I looked bad because I was looking at myself in the mirror. And so you have to, right off the bat, you have to have kind of a compassionate tone with yourself, which is interesting because this week, Chiron moves to step 29 Pisces, which means we are now this week, as we launch this new ego, one of the things that's clear is that you are having a test of your self-compassion. The whole time Chiron has gone through Pisces, we've been healing our abilities to be spiritual, healing our abilities to be compassionate to ourselves. We now know better. You may not practice, but you know better that it's nice to be nice, right, to yourself. So as we're practicing, that's part of the test this week, that you remain compassionate and you hold that spiritual tone that you claim to live by, right? Like, I'm talking to myself here. So Chiron at 29 means we have to kind of do that. Another interesting thing, of course, is Mercury is retrograde, which is a blessing. And it's also another reason why I feel this is the creation of the new ego, because the ego and the mind are co-conspirators. They always trigger each other, right? So your ego's like, I'm pissed, and your mind's like, are you going to let him get away with that? And your ego's like, no, and then your mind's like, right? Like in our ego and our mind, they work together. So the fact that Mercury is retrograding right now says, oh, we can reprogram the mind at the same time we train this new ego. So it's super beneficial. This week, Mercury retrogrades from step 11 to step 6 by the end of the week. What that means is you're going to start the week obsessed with perfection, which is part of the old ego, step 11. You're going to start the week too critical of yourself mentally, still the old voice that's going to antagonize the ego. And by the time the week ends, you ought to be open to new thinking. So it looks like this whole week, it'll take this entire week just to like get that old mental conspirator to stop antagonizing yourself. If you can stay this awake. I mean, I'm hoping for the best here. But I give that to you just so you have an understanding of like how long this will take. This doesn't happen overnight, right? The other interesting thing is Venus is in Taurus this week. Venus moves from step 3 to step 10 in Taurus. And Venus is the part of us that opens up to things, right? And you've probably experienced this with people. It's like, you know what? She never used to dance. Now she likes to dance. It's like, so they just opened up to it, right? And that can be measured by the orbit of Venus as far as the cyclical pattern. And right now with Venus in Taurus, it means a couple of things. One, it means that we're going to feel spring. We're going to feel things birthing. We're going to have a lot of great tactile 5 sense pleasures coming on the horizon, which is great, right? Said the Taurus. But it also means that we're opening up to a new reality. That's what Taurus comes down to, what we manifest, what we make material, right? And Taurus gone too far is materialistic, right? That's because it's the consciousness of what we intend to make material. So as we're rethinking our ego, as we're birthing a new ego, we're also opening up to a new reality, a new way of living, a new way of manifesting. And we want to keep an open mind, okay? What you have lived so far in your life does not determine what's going to happen next unless you allow it to. And so part of all of this is staying open-minded the whole week. Now, another fascinating thing this week is that Mars and Saturn are basically conjoined, which means our ego consciousness is right connected to our control consciousness. And that means that the collective conscious is going to be egotistical and controlling, okay? And so I think we're going to see this in the national and international spotlight, like the ego and control start getting kind of crazy. One of the things I've noticed with Mars and Saturn is this whole diplomat thing and Cold War stirring up again with Russia and us throwing out Russian agents and them throwing out our agents. That's Mars-Saturn. That's ego and control. And basically, in the collective consciousness, the old way of control isn't working, right? Like, it isn't working in an international scope. It's not working. People aren't happy. People are still friction. If the Cold War is coming back, then we ain't learned anything, right? In your consciousness, it means that it's time to make a decision to take different action, Saturn on Mars. It's time to control differently, Saturn at step 8, and then moving to step 9. So in all of this evolution of yourself over the week, you are also open to the idea of like, well, how should I take control? How should I go about it? So this big question of how do we control and how we should go about it is also playing out all over the week and undecided probably until the end of the week when you're, clear-minded and ready. Saturn moves to step 9, which means that any moment we're going to want to take action. But I would say taking action without letting this whole retrograde process is premature, and it sounds like the old ego to me. Now, what this all boils down to, in my opinion, in a big picture, and then we'll break it down for you guys in the tea time. The big picture of all this, to me, is that we are creating a new ego, and this new ego I'm coining a winged ego. This is an ego designed not to survive, but designed to fly. And this is the potential to be the greatest you have ever been in your life. And I believe in August, when we have a solar eclipse in Leo, if you have birthed a winged ego, you will give birth to a golden egg. That's right. A golden egg that we most likely planted a wish 1 year ago when we had the Grand Master Great American Solar Eclipse at step 28. We planted for that egg. This year the egg hatches. But what's important to know is this can only happen with a winged ego, not the old ego. The old ego just puts out old-fashioned eggs. So with that said, that's quite a teaser. Go steep yourself some tea, and let's have our weekly tea time. Hello, my friend, and welcome to our tea time. Today's tea time topic is birth of a winged ego. Now, as I mentioned in our last segment, I believe the collective consciousness is doing one of two things. Either they are rebuilding the old ego, this time tougher, stronger, better, faster, right? Which are all ego superlatives. Or they are birthing a new ego, which I'm going to coin the winged ego. And I think this is the best kind of visual to understand the difference between our old ego and our new ego. Our old ego was stuck on the ground, stuck with whatever situation that they were born to, fighting to stay alive, right? And the winged ego is a new way of behaving with ourself that allows us to fly like an eagle with the new ego, in my opinion. And I think this is the birth of us ascending. This is the ego character necessary for spiritual ascension. Because, quite frankly, the only thing that keeps human beings from ascending are two things: their minds and their egos. So I want to talk about what this means more specifically in more detailed kind of sauce for each of the 12 signs. And I'm breaking this into three categories. First of all, talking about the scope of the week, because I'm shifting now, if you haven't noticed, the Mercury retrograde. I'm changing a little bit to more be a person who can guide you through the scope of the week rather than the day by day. I'm going to leave that for my Serious Joy subscribers because I have a more intimate conversation. I know who they are. I can give them a day by day play. But for the general public, I think the best thing I can do for being of service is giving you an idea of like where you're taking off and where you want to land this week. And so to me, there's three things to pay attention to as we move through the week. First, let me just say where we'll be emotionally. This week, emotionally, the collective conscious is going to start very guarded with the moon in Scorpio. So we're going to start very, very guarded, and we're going to be reaffirming our guard. And to some degree, that's kind of a test from the universe because some people will not feel faith, not intuit that everything's fine, and will overbuild their guard. And that's kind of them deciding to take the old ego, the grounded ego, the one that's stuck in fight or flight. Some people will feel that they are safe, and this moon in Scorpio will allow them to open up their boundaries and trust a little more in their life. Then the moon moves into Sagittarius, so after we kind of get our ground or our guard, we then review the story we were born to live, Sagittarius. And in that period in the middle of the week, we're exploring where we have been and where the hero is going and whether or not we're going to fly or go by train, you know what I mean, or go on foot, which is the old ego. And then the moon moves into Capricorn at the end of the week, which means emotionally we're ready to commit to this journey. So it's kind of a rite of passage this week emotionally. Now, the three areas that are important, one is the launch of the winged ego. The launch of the winged ego, we move from step 12 to step 19. So Monday morning, we wake up and we're like, it's a brand new world, anything's possible, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's going to be positive. And then step 13 is going to come crashing down and we're all going to be tested. And that's really where the test is, and the moon's in Scorpio. By Sunday, the sun is at step 19. By Sunday, you move from this uncertain all the way to, okay, this is the way the ego is going to be. So in just 1 week, pretty much people decide whether or not their ego is going to fly or whether or not their ego is going to stay grounded. The second force that I think is a pinch point of collective conscious is the Mars-Saturn conjunction, as I mentioned. Mars moves from step 8 to step 12 this week. That means your ego will make a decision and open up to changing. The ego will be opening up to change, which is great, okay? But again, for some war generals, that change means they need more body armor. It doesn't mean that they want to fly. It means they want to be heavier and more defensive and more fortified. So, it depends on your free will as to which way you go, but the ego will be ready to make a change. Saturn moves from 8 to 9 Capricorn at the same time, which means we move from decision to action. So we're ready to move the whole conscious force this week. We'll be ready to go forward. Then the last thing that I think is very important is Chiron at step 29 Pisces. Because this is the test of whether or not you learned anything since the Mayan shift. This is the test. Did you spiritually get it? Do you understand what compassion is and peace and the path of least resistance? And it's not that you have to apply it to the world. It's that you have to apply it to yourself. And we'll see if you can pull it off. So a third factor of whether or not someone will transcend the old ego is if they can maintain that space of self-compassion and non-judgment. If they can maintain that space. And I'm talking to myself here. So what I want to do is walk through all 12 signs and talk about these 3 points, where the conscious points are, so that you can kind of take notes. I would say this is a week where your sun sign is more important than your rising sign, or your A story for my subscribers is more important than your B story. The B story is how things turn out. This is all about how we act in the moment. So your sun sign is more powerful. You'll see long-term kind of evidence in your B story or rising sign, but it will take a couple weeks for you to see that it changed, I think. I don't think it'll be blindly evident, but it might be. I don't know. You have to write and tell me. So, and as always, I'm going to put up what sign I'm talking about here to the side of the screen. So if you want to fast forward to your part, go right ahead. Aries. Aries are literally, because they are the purebred of the zodiac, they are completely creating a new ego. And even if they are going to continue with the old ego's design, they're still getting a new one. Okay, so it'll be a new and improved of the old, on the cereal box. So they are literally birthing new behavior. Again, and remember, your behavior is what determines whether or not you're a grounded ego or a winged ego, okay? So they're going to be testy probably and tested, where the old ego and the new ego go back and forth all week. What they are cutting with Mars and Saturn is they are cutting away their old vision of what the future would be like. So they have to say, it's not what I thought it was going to be. Okay, which is not easy for the ego. And then lastly, their test with Chiron is faith, the test of faith. In other words, Aries, no one's going to tell you if it's going to work out or not. You're not going to have any empirical evidence. You're not going to have an insurance policy. It comes down to whether or not inside it feels right or it doesn't feel right. And that is the test. And that's the difference between being able to fly and staying grounded, in my opinion. If you're going to fly, you have to have faith that everything is going to be all right, right? So Aries this week are making a profound change, and don't be afraid to cut your old vision of the future because a new future is coming. Taurus. Tauruses are building a fearless ego, a fearless ego. So that's the birth of their winged ego. It's fearlessness, and not into their mopey worry. I'm talking to myself again because I'm a Taurus. So we used to worry and try to plan and try to maneuver out of stuff. I think the new ego is like, whatever comes, bring it. Okay, fearlessness. Now, what has to be cut is an old belief in yourself, Taurus, about what you thought you were. So you thought you were one thing, turns out you're another. So there's a decision to cut away the old belief about yourself. And maybe the old belief was that you couldn't make it, or that there'd always be problems or other things. So be willing to cut that belief. And this will be a test of your social calling, which means that you have been building a connection to the world and to society, and you have been healing in that connection. And you know the right way to behave and be in the world, and it's time to be that 100% and be compassionate to yourself, means that you worry more about you and how you're doing than you do about how you look in the world. So you actually take the compassion on you to be your best in the world. Gemini. Gemini is creating a new social belonging. I've had the pleasure of talking to a couple Geminis, including my son. I know this is absolutely true. Geminis are becoming a new winged ego in the world. So they're creating a new identity in society. New reputation, new brand, new marketing, the works. All right, new logo. What they have to cut are their old trust issues. So Geminis used to, well, they have a lot of problems trusting, mostly because they're in their head all the time. You know what I mean? Like, and the head doesn't know if it's going to work out. Only our senses do. So they're having to cut away the old trust issues. Can't bring those with you if you're going to fly. And this will be a test of their future and their career legacy. So they must be compassionate with themselves and be in touch with the fact that their future will be all right because they sense it's all right. That's why. All right? All right. Cancer. Cancer's ego is creating a new decision strategy. So their new winged ego is basically that they're going to do other things in their career, other things in their future than they thought they had to do. And a lot of Cancer's ego is tied to, like, I have to care for everybody. And this new ego is like, I don't know. Have them hire a nanny. You know what I mean? So your new winged ego has to do with your career and your future. You are cutting old promises to yourself. So you might have made promises when you were 21. What the planets are saying is those don't apply anymore. Sorry. It's a new world. So it's new promises are cut, new promises to yourself are made, or what I call marriage vows. And you must have faith and compassion that your life's purpose is moving forward the way it's supposed to move. You must be compassionate with yourself and trusting that the overall story is exactly where it should be. Leos. Leos are launching a new belief in themselves. This is huge. I'm a Leo rising, so I sense this to some degree. You're launching a new belief in yourself. Your old ego had certain beliefs. The new winged ego has new beliefs about what's possible and what you're capable of. To pull this off, you must cut away the old lifestyle. So the old way of living in your body, the old way of working, the old routines, the old familiars, the old fishing hole, all of it. None of it is built for success. So you have to make new commitments to a new type of life. And what this is a test of is whether or not you can change. A lot of Leos kind of are like leopards. They think that they can't change their spots, right? But the truth of the matter is, of course you can. In fact, you are creation love energy in its purest form. You are more mutable than anyone else. It really has to do with your comfort zones. So in the transformation for Leos, you must be compassionate to yourself in this process. That's your test of Chiron, to be compassionate and patient. And if it takes you 2 days or 2 years or two decades, fine. Be as patient as it takes. Virgo. Virgo is launching a new self-trust ego. So Virgos have been, their old ego corrupted their trust. They didn't trust anything in the world, and that's their ego worried about survival. So they're getting a new ego that does trust, all right? And it's not that you trust the world, it's that you trust yourself. The new ego trusts yourself. Now, what this will involve is you have to cut away your old love stories. Okay, so the one that got away, or your heart wasn't happy, or any of the old love stories. The old love story might be that you're going to marry the high school quarterback, and you're now 45. It's not going to happen. You know what I mean? And there's a hunky person waiting for you. So you have to cut away and just call it a loss for whatever your heart couldn't accomplish so far. It was trying to accomplish it with the old ego. Of course, it couldn't do it. Now, what this is a test of is yourself. This is a test of your self-mastery. You must stay in compassion with yourself. You must stay non-judgmental with yourself. Huge, to quote Bernie Sanders for a Virgo, huge. And if you stay in self-compassion, non-judgment, you will have a winged ego. Libra. Libra is creating new marriage vows. So Libras had kind of weird marriage vows where they're really in it for themselves, but they pretended like they're in it for other people, and they were hoping the other people would cooperate, and they never did. You know what I mean? So Libras found themselves not getting what they want, and I think the new winged ego for Libra is one that is committed to self first and transparent about it. Like, I got to take care of myself before I save the world, okay? So that's the new ego. It will mean that you must cut away from the old way of ignoring your feelings. Libras try to stay in the head, and they ignore the fact that they feel like, a carrot in boiling water. And so you must have a new strategy for how you're going to nurture yourself if you intend to pull this next chapter off. You can't the scale must be polished. The scale must be placed on solid ground. Now, what this will be a test of for you is your day-to-day moment. You're going to be tempted to go into the old fight or flight, like, oh gosh, the scale's out of balance. You're going to be tempted to go down that path. You have to stay compassionate in the moment. That means in the mundane, okay? Libras love to think, and they don't like to really focus on the mundane. But you have to be focused in the mundane on self-compassion, non-judgment, and inner peace. That is your test. Scorpios. Scorpios are creating a new ego about life. So Scorpios have had a hard life, especially if you were born before the 80s. You have had a hard life. But it's time now to approach life as if it isn't hard. So your winged ego does not look at life as a challenge, a war, a burden, a blah, 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 a test of strength. All these old ego, okay, grounded ego terms. This will mean that they must cut their old thinking. So you can't think like a war general if you're going to be living in a life of luxury. You can't think like there's someone out to get you if you're living in a life of joy. Okay, so what has to be cut away is these old thinking patterns. What this is a test of is whether or not your heart will get what it wants. Your heart not getting what it wants has always been your excuse to be a warmonger. It's always been your excuse to think like that. And I'm not saying all Scorpios are warmongers. Sometimes they feel attacked, which is still a war. Okay, so it doesn't matter. But the point is the test is, will your heart get what it wants? You have to listen to your own inner self and know that if it feels like you will, then you need to trust it. Sagittarius. Sagittarius are creating a new self-love kernel, a new self-love foundation. Sagittarius have loved themselves after the fact when they were telling the story about themselves. You know what I mean? But in the moment, they're usually sacrificial lambs. They usually go too far. They fall out of balance. They lend more money than they have. And as a result, their self-love in the moment, their old ego was kind of basing self-love just on surviving, and that's it. They just made sure they got fed. That's it. There was no thriving at all. So this new ego for Sag is, I want super califragilistic joy, okay? I want the highest joy that's possible. And that's the new ego. It means you must cut away from your old self-esteem debts. So all the reasons why you're not worth it, all the debt, all the credit card debt, all that stuff, you have to let it go. There's no way you can fly like this new winged ego if you are holding all this debt. And don't worry, the universe forgives you. File spiritual bankruptcy. And what you are being tested on are your feelings. So this is a test of your emotional foundation. This is a test of your ability to be compassionate with yourself and kind to yourself. You must keep an emotional, peaceful tone to make the transition between egos. Capricorn. Capricorn are creating a new ego when it comes to the way they nurture themselves. And Capricorns have usually been incredibly harsh with themselves, I have to say. In all my experience, they basically treat themselves like a drill sergeant would treat a new recruit. And they have not cared at all about how bad they felt. They made themselves go to work. They made themselves show up when they felt like shift. So this new ego makes the Capricorn feel good and grounded at all times, regardless of success, regardless of outcome. Now, what this means you must cut are your old ego behavior patterns, your old defenses. All of your ego behavior was based on ignoring your feelings. So the entire ego has to go. Okay, none of it will work. It can't even be refurbished. No, you can't sell it used. Okay, forget it. But the test is in your mental attitude. So Capricorns must remain self-compassionate in their thoughts, self-compassionate in their attitude, non-judgmental in their attitude for them to pull this off. Aquariuses. Aquariuses are developing a new approach on thinking. And it's funny, Aquariuses are very, very peaceful on the outside, but on the inside, they were constantly kind of waging war against different things, anything that disagree with their motives, da-da-da-da. And so their mind has created a lot of havoc for them. And this new ego has to be based on peace, not war. All right? And sometimes it's all for righteous reasons, and I think that's how Aquariuses get caught up and confused. It's it doesn't matter if it's for the good of humankind, it's still a war. You know what I mean? It's still a fight approach versus a peace approach. So they're going to think differently. For this to happen, they have to cut away from their old fears. They can't let their fears get to them anymore because their fears was the excuse for the war or the excuse for the aggressive thinking, okay? Or the careless thinking in some cases too. Now, what this will be a test of is their values. Aquariuses are afraid that if they give up this conflict in their head, that will compromise their values. And what you have to know is, nope, you know your values are good because you sense that they're good. That is incorporating spirit into ego. You're sensing it's good, so we're not going to go fight. And so you will be tested on money, productivity, and manifestation. And then finally, the Pisces. Pisces are building a new ego based on self-confidence. Their old ego of survival was very much based on past life guilt, and they're born feeling guilty and born and all that kind of energy, and so their ego was all kind of like, oh, I'll never go far anyways kind of thing. And their ego was destructive instead of constructive when it came to building value. So the new ego for Pisces is a constructive value-building ego. This is the winged ego for Pisces. This means you must cut your losses with the world. Whatever you were in the past, whatever's on your resume, whatever's on your Facebook, it doesn't matter. Dump it. Cut it away completely. You're creating a new relationship to society based on the new ego of thriving. So I wouldn't even worry about it. And anyone who's been with the Pisces knows they're going to be gone in any minute. You know what I mean? Like, and they may be back, probably at dinner time. But the test is of your character. So you will be tested on your character, on your behavior. You are going to be tempted to fall into the old behavior, passive-aggressive guilt complexes, you know what I mean, like drinking the night away. Like the old behavior will tempt you back, and you must stay true, compassionate, and non-judgmental in every action you take. And if you do, you will birth the new winged, abundant ego. So as you can hear, my friend, I think this week is going to be very powerful. I think we'll see plenty of stuff in the outer world, like on the news and Fox versus MSNBC. I don't know if you guys are watching the news, but it's almost like Fox is the South in the Civil War, and MSNBC and the others are the North. Have you noticed that? Like, just seeing the world, the collective conscious, going into these two camps. And I personally think that's the old ego. The idea that there's two camps, that's the old ego. The new winged ego is we're all the same. We're all cut from the same consciousness. We're all brothers and sisters. And keep that in mind. So if you see the world going to shift this week, it's okay. As long as yours is birthing wings, you're on the right path, my friend, to ascension. I have a couple of announcements. One, you don't have to do this alone. I invented this awesome service, Serious Joy Personal Sensei Service. I take your date of birth, and I give you this entire daily conscious menu that is based on coaching you, based on your date of birth and your time of birth. And I am very detailed, and because people are complicated, you gotta get it dose by dose, day after day. And I just released what I call the Megascope monthly reports, where I report on all 12 signs and what they can expect for the full month. That just comes standard when you're a subscriber. If you haven't tried it yet, this would be a good time. You don't have to birth this ego alone. Come on down to SeriousJoy.com. And then a warm welcome to come on into our little club on the internet. I know Facebook is getting a lot of knocks for what it is and what it isn't, but we've created a very humble, awesome little group of light called the Namaste Today Club. And anyone is welcome. Our only rule is you got to be compassionate if you stay. If you'd like to join, come on in. It's at namastetoday.club. All right, friend. Good luck in your quest. I will be trying the same. No one gets out of this one. And remember, while you're out there, birth a new ego, that I love you, and to live, love, be.
It's serious joy, joy, joy.